A Navy SEAL and his daughter were enjoying a boat ride on the lake when the father was suddenly struck by a heart attack and lost consciousness. The little girl quickly spiraled into panic and fear. Shards of crystal. Tom gripped the steering wheel of the small motorboat while his daughter, Sarah, sat across from him with a notebook on her lap. Tom was a seasoned Navy SEAL, and he believed that every outing was a good opportunity to train his daughter in basic survival skills. He cut the engine, letting the boat drift freely, and took a brass compass from his jacket pocket. Tom placed the device on Sarah's palm and began to explain how to determine direction in the vast expanse of the lake. "If you know north, you will never be lost," Tom said in a deep, warm, and confident voice. Sarah listened intently to her father because she understood that these lessons were vital for a special operative. Tom pointed toward the distant red rock ridges and instructed his daughter on how to align the compass needle with the topographical map. He wanted his daughter to develop the composure of an operative, so he always required her to repeat the instructions with the utmost accuracy. Sarah eagerly practiced while the gentle lake breeze lightly swayed her ponytail, and everything seemed perfect for a peaceful weekend. However, that peace shattered in an instant when Tom felt a jolt of electricity run down his spine. He reached for his water bottle, but suddenly a sharp, agonizing pain pierced his chest like a poisoned arrow. Tom frowned and tried to take a deep breath to stifle the pain, as he didn't want to alarm his daughter. But the pressure in his chest intensified, making him feel as if a 1,000-pound boulder was crushing his lungs. The pain rapidly spread to his left arm, and numbness began to claim his fingertips. Tom tried to cling to the side of the boat to keep his balance, but his legs suddenly lost all their strength. He slumped to the wooden floor. His breathing became shallow and ragged, and his vision began to blur from lack of oxygen. Sarah dropped the compass onto the deck when she saw her father fall, and she immediately rushed to him, her face drained of all color. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Sarah cried out, using her small hands to try and prop up her father's head. Tom wanted to answer his daughter, but his jaw clenched, and he could only manage weak moans in his throat. Cold sweat broke out on Tom's forehead despite the hot weather on the lake, and he knew he was suffering a severe heart attack. Relying on his SEAL instincts, he tried to signal Sarah to move toward the boat's console to seek help. But the next wave of pain struck even more violently, causing Tom to completely lose consciousness, and he collapsed heavily onto the boat floor. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably and shaking her father's shoulder, but Tom no longer reacted, aside from his shallow, rattling breaths. The 9-year-old girl now realized she was alone on the vast lake while her strong father was close to death. She quickly crawled toward the cockpit and grabbed the handheld radio. Resting beside the control panel, Sarah pressed the transmit button as her father had taught her, and she began calling on Channel 16, the emergency channel for marine vessels. "Help! Can anyone hear me?" Sarah choked into the microphone, her hands trembling incessantly. "My daddy fell. Anyone wake up? We're on Lake Mead." The dry static of the radio signal crackled, and there was no clear response from the other end of the line. Sarah looked around, but the boat had drifted quite far from the main routes, and she couldn't see any other vessels nearby. She shouted into the radio again, but her sobs made her voice chaotic and incomprehensible. The boat drifted freely with the current and began turning aimlessly in the middle of the immense lake. Sarah felt hopeless looking at her father's pale face, and she pressed the radio button again in desperation. She didn't know her current coordinates because she hadn't finished the lesson on topographic maps. She could only plead into the void, hoping that someone, somewhere, could hear this weak signal. Meanwhile, time was running out for Tom, and every second was a life and death struggle that he was no longer able to fight on his own. Sarah persistently clung to the radio, her eyes fixed on her father's motionless figure. She tried to recall every detail her father had taught her about broadcasting an emergency signal, but panic was slowly seizing her small mind. She screamed in the microphone one last time, her voice hoarse from crying and full of pleading. Please save my daddy. Officer Evans steered the Nevada State Police Boston Whaler Patrol boat, gliding smoothly over the calm water of Lake Mead, while his four-legged partner, Rex, a German shepherd, sat regally at the bow. The midday lake breeze blew against them, making the German shepherd's erect ears gently twitch with each ripple, and its wet nose constantly twitched. Analyzing the scents in the air, Evans relaxed his grip on the wheel and glanced at his watch, as the morning shift had passed so peacefully that it was boring. The vast lake stretched as far as the eye could see, with only a few small fishing boats scattered in the distance, making the surroundings eerily quiet. Evans reached for his water bottle to take a sip, thinking to himself that today would be an easy day to end the work week. He loved the tranquility, but at the same time, his police officer instinct always kept him at a certain level of alertness regarding the environment. Evans slowed the boat to save fuel and began observing the western horizon through his specialized polarized sunglasses. He spotted a white sports boat drifting freely about a mile away from his position, and it didn't seem to be following any fixed course. The harsh sunlight reflecting off the water created heat shimmers that made the distant image blurry and difficult to determine. Evans squinted to look closer and saw a bright orange object moving back and forth constantly on the deck of that boat. He sighed in relief, telling himself it must be a child wearing a life jacket, and waving at the police as usual. Children were often excited to see patrol boats, and them waving or shouting to get attention was a common occurrence on Lake Mead on beautiful weekends. Evans was about to raise his hand to wave back out of habit, and then steer in another direction to continue his planned patrol route. He didn't want to disturb the enjoyment of a family on their day off, so he decided to keep his distance and not approach the boat. However, Rex suddenly had strange reactions that forced Evans to stop his intention to change course. The dog, which had been relaxing, abruptly stood up, and all the muscles in its muscular body tensed up like a bowstring. Rex moved right to the edge of the bow and focused all its attention on the distant white boat, as if it had spotted dangerous prey. Evans was surprised because he had never seen Rex react so strongly to ordinary pleasure boats. "Hey Rex, what is it, boy?" Evans asked in a reassuring tone, but the dog didn't turn its head to look at him. Instead, Rex began to emit small whines in his throat, and his ears constantly rotated, trying to catch sounds imperceptible to human ears. The wind changed direction and blew strongly from the strange boat toward the patrol boat, carrying scent molecules that only Rex's keen sense of smell, 1,000 times better than a human's, could analyze. The dog shuddered, and the fur on his hackles began to stand up along his spine. Evans immediately recognized this change, as it was a sign that Rex was shifting into his highest state of readiness. Rex began to bark, and his barks were neither playful nor the usual warning barks. They were short, sharp, and urgent barks. The barking echoed over the quiet lake, and Rex kept looking back and forth between the boat and Evans, as if trying to convey something extremely urgent. Evans frowned, and he felt a chill run down his spine because he knew that Rex was never wrong. In their 5 years of working together, the dog had detected drugs hidden in tires or found lost children in deep forests using just a piece of old clothing. Evans understood that Rex sensed something very wrong happening on that boat that his eyes could not see. "All right," Evans said loudly, and he immediately throttled up the engine to increase the patrol boat speed. The engine roared powerfully, and the bow surged onto the water, creating 2 white wakes as Evans steered it straight toward the target. Rex remained steady at the bow despite the high speed and the strong wind hitting his face, as his focus was now locked onto the drifting boat. Evans grabbed the radio, clipped to his shoulder, and began calling the command center to report the preliminary situation. "Patrol 4 to Central. I'm approaching a suspicious vessel in the western area of the lake. My K-9 is at level 1 alert, and I need to check it immediately," Evans said quickly and clearly into the radio. The confirmation from the dispatcher crackled in his earpiece, requesting him to report back as soon as there were new developments. Evans held the steering wheel tightly, his eyes never leaving the orange that was growing larger in his sight. When the distance narrowed to about 300 meters, Evans began to notice the unusual details he had missed earlier. The boat was not anchored, but it was also not running, as there was no foamy wake at the stern. It was drifting sideways with the wind aimlessly, and this was very dangerous if it encountered large waves or hit submerged rocks. But what made Evans' heart clench was the action of the person waving the orange life jacket. It was a small girl with long, messy hair, and her wave was not a greeting, but one of extreme panic. Rex barked louder and more incessantly as the police boat approached the 100-meter range. The dog ran back and forth at the bow, and he kept looking down at the water as if wanting to jump in and swim over immediately. Evans slowed down to avoid creating a large wake that could capsize the small boat, and he sounded a short blast of the siren to signal his presence. The girl on the boat heard the siren and immediately dropped the life jacket, burying her face in the side of the boat, sobbing uncontrollably. Evans pulled the patrol boat alongside the port side of the drifting boat and quickly threw the anchor line to secure the two vessels together. Rex was the first to jump over as soon as the distance was close enough, and he immediately bolted toward the deck where a man lay motionless. The distance between the two boats quickly closed to zero. Evans skillfully pulled the patrol boat right up to the starboard side of the freely drifting sports boat. As the two hulls gently bumped together with a thud, Evans quickly threw a rope over the cleat to secure their position. He didn't have time for formalities. Every moment was now measured in a lifetime. Rex, with his sharp professional instinct, leaped onto the other deck the moment the distance was sufficient. The dog no longer barked, its forepaws clinging to the slick deck to keep its balance, its dark eyes assessing the entire scene in a flash. Evans cut the engine and jumped after Rex. His police boots thudded onto the wooden deck, the solid sound shattering the terrifying silence between the boats. The scene before him made his heart clench. Tom, the burly man with the physique of a special operative, lay completely motionless. His tanned skin had turned an ashen gray, a clear sign of severe lack of oxygen. Beside him, the little girl Sarah cowered, her small hands clutching her father's wrist, tears streaming, but not daring to cry out loud. "Step back a bit, sweetheart. Let me help your dad," Evans said. Sarah looked up at him with swollen eyes, then obediently moved back, giving the officer room. Evans knelt beside Tom. He placed 2 fingers on the man's carotid artery in the neck. The pulse was very weak, erratic, and fragile like a thread about to break. Tom's chest was barely rising and falling. Evans immediately grabbed the radio clipped to his shoulder and pressed the emergency call button. "Central, this is Patrol 4. Code 3. I repeat, Code 3 at North 36, West 114 coordinates. Male victim, approximately 40 years old, suspected acute myocardial infarction. Pulse is very weak, potential cardiac arrest. Request water rescue and helicopter support immediately." The sharp confirmation from the dispatcher echoed in his earpiece. Evans tossed the radio aside and began cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. He clasped his hands together, placed them directly onto the center of Tom's sternum, and began pressing forcefully. 1, 2, 3, 4. Evans counted the rhythm in his head, putting his full body weight into his hands to force the blood to circulate in the SEAL's body. "Come on, buddy, don't give up now," Evans grit his teeth, sweat starting to bead on his forehead under the scorching Nevada sun. Tom's muscles were very rigid and thick, making chest compressions harder than usual, but Evans dared not reduce the force. He knew that for a special operative like Tom, the will to survive was strong, but his body was betraying him. While Evans was fighting for Tom's life with steady and strenuous chest compressions, another rescue, one of the Spirit, was taking place right beside them. Rex, the police dog trained to attack criminals or sniff out drugs, now displayed a completely different side. He sensed the extreme panic that was overwhelming Sarah. The scent of adrenaline and fear emanating from the little girl was so strong that Rex could clearly perceive it. Instead of standing guard or barking loudly, Rex gently moved closer to the corner of the boat where Sarah was huddled. She was shaking violently, her eyes wide with trauma as she watched Evans press hard on her father's chest. Rex subtly lowered his head, gently nudged her arm with his wet nose. Sarah flinched, turning to look at the massive dog beside her. Rex didn't growl. His ears were slightly lowered to look less intimidating, and he emitted soft, gentle whimpers in his throat like a comfort. Sarah tentatively reached out her trembling hand and touched Rex's thick, warm fur. The tangible feeling of the dog's coat seemed to pull her out of the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Rex took another step, using his entire body to shield Sarah's view, preventing her from seeing the violent resuscitation Evans was performing. The dog sat down, steady as a fortress wall, allowing Sarah to wrap her arms around his neck. She buried her face in Rex's shoulder, and for the first time since the incident occurred, her breathing began to slow. Rex sat perfectly still, accepting her weight and her tears, becoming the only anchor in the middle of this vast lake. 28, 29, 30. Evans counted out loud, then quickly lifted Tom's chin to give 2 rescue breaths. Tom's chest rose and fell. Evans immediately resumed compressions. He had been doing this continuously for 5 minutes, and his muscles were starting to ache, but he didn't stop. Suddenly, the roar of an engine echoed from afar, shattering the lake's stillness. The specialized ambulance boat from the Las Vegas Fire Department was cutting through the water, followed by the distinct womp-womp of a medical helicopter descending. "They're here," Evans shouted without stopping compressions. "Sarah, just hold on to Rex, don't let go." The rescue team pulled alongside the boat professionally. 3 paramedics jumped over with their emergency kit and an automated external defibrillator, AED. "We'll take it from here, officer," one man yelled. Evans stepped back, breathing heavily, his hands trembling with exhaustion. The paramedics tore open Tom's shirt, exposing his muscular chest. They placed the electrode pads on his chest. "No pulse," preparing to shock. "Clear." The machine beeped, signaling it was charging. "So." Tom's body arched off the boat floor and then fell back. Down. All eyes were on the monitor screen. A flat line still ran across it. "Not yet." Second shock. Increasing voltage. Rex sensed the rising tension in the air. The dog hugged Sarah tighter as the machine's shrill charging sound rang out again. "So." This time, after the body jerked, a weak but steady beep sounded from the monitor. "We have a pulse. Sinus rhythm is weak, but it's back." The paramedic yelled, his voice filled with excitement. "Prepare to transfer the victim to the helicopter. We need to get him to the or within 15 minutes." Tom was quickly collared, secured to a stretcher, and transferred to the ambulance boat to be taken to the nearest helicopter landing zone on shore. Throughout the ensuing chaos, Sarah never left Rex's side for a second. Only when a paramedic approached to check on her did Evans step over. "I'll take the girl back to the dock and go with her to the hospital," Evans told the rescue team leader. As the sound of the helicopter faded toward the city, the lake returned to its silence. Evans turned to Sarah, who was still clutching Rex's harness. "Your dad'll be fine, Sarah. He's a Navy SEAL, right?" Evans smiled, trying to reassure the girl. "Now, let's go follow your dad." Sarah nodded, her eyes still red but less panicked. She climbed in the police boat. Rex jumped in after her and lay down right by her feet. Evans started the engine, and the patrol boat turned toward the mainland, leaving behind the dark blue water where the battle for a life had just taken place. St. Rose Dominican Hospital sat on the edge of Las Vegas, bustling with sirens and stark fluorescent lights. In the emergency department waiting room, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. Officer Evans sat on a hard plastic chair, his police uniform stained with engine grease and dried sweat, but he had no intention of leaving. Rex lay prone right at his feet, his head resting on his. Front paws, his eyes half closed, but his ears occasionally twitched whenever a nurse's footsteps passed by. Sarah had been cared for by social workers and nurses in a separate room, given a snack and clean clothes while waiting for her mother to fly in from another state. Evans had called to inform Tom's family of the situation and promised to stay there until there was official news. The clock on the wall ticked by agonizingly slowly. 2 hours of surgery felt like a century. Evans looked down at Rex, recalling the moment on the lake. If Rex hadn't barked, if he had driven past, if he had been delayed by even a minute, the what-ifs kept swirling in his mind. The surgery room door swung open. A doctor around 50 in green surgical scrubs walked out looking exhausted. He pulled down his mask, revealing a sweat-dotted face. Evans jumped to his feet, and Rex immediately stood up as well, his tail giving a gentle, inquisitive wag. "Officer Evans?" the doctor asked, his voice hoarse. "Yes, that's me." "How is he, doctor?" Evans asked, his heart pounding. The doctor sighed, then gave a relieved smile. "He's out of the critical phase. It was a massive heart attack, what we call a widowmaker, due to its extremely high mortality rate. A main coronary artery was completely blocked." He paused, looking directly into Evans' eyes. "I have to be honest with you. You saved his life. If you had arrived 5 minutes later, or if you hadn't performed proper CPR right on the scene, his heart would have been permanently damaged. Beyond recovery. You kept oxygen flowing to his brain. It's a miracle." Evans shook his head, looking down at the German shepherd standing beside him. "It wasn't me, doctor. It was my partner. He detected them when I couldn't even see anything." The doctor looked at Rex with a mix of surprise and admiration. "Well, that four-legged fellow deserves a medal." That evening, when Tom had been moved to the intensive care unit, ICU, and had regained some consciousness, Sarah was allowed a brief visit with her father. When she walked out of the room, her small face was much brighter. Sarah's mother had also arrived, and she embraced her daughter, crying with happiness. But what surprised Evans was Sarah's next action. After leaving her mother's embrace, she went straight toward Evans and Rex, who were standing at the end of the hallway. She didn't speak to Evans right away. Instead, Sarah knelt down on the cold hospital floor, level with Rex's eyes. The police dog, which always maintained a professional distance from strangers while on duty, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He sat still, his tail tapping softly against the floor. Sarah wrapped her arms tightly around Rex's neck, burying her face in the thick fur on the dog's chest. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the familiar scent that had comforted her amid the storm on the lake. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her tiny voice small but echoing in the quiet hallway. "Thank you for listening to me when no one else could hear." Rex gently craned his neck, licking away the tear streaks on her cheek. It was a gesture so tender that it made Evans, a tough man who had witnessed countless incidents, feel a sting in his nose. Evans placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, squeezing lightly. He watched Sarah's mother standing there, smiling through her tears and nodding her thanks to him. But he knew the deepest, most sincere gratitude had been given to the right address. On the drive back to the police station that night, Evans was silent, occasionally glancing at Rex in the rearview mirror. The dog was sitting in the back seat, his head out the window, taking in the night air, looking as calm as if he hadn't just done something extraordinary. Evans reflected on what had happened. Humans have technology, radios, phones, helicopters. But in that moment of life and death, all technology failed against the distance and the interference. Sarah had screamed in desperation, but her scream had been swallowed by the vastness of the lake. To human ears, it was only silence. But Rex had heard, not with his physical ears, but with a sixth sense, an invisible connection between living beings. The dog had sensed the fear, the panic, and the silent plea vibrating in the air that Evans had overlooked. Rex hadn't seen a child at play. He had seen a life in danger. Evans reached back and scratched his companion's head. Rex nudged his hand, letting out a satisfied breath. "You're a good boy, Rex," Evans murmured. "A very good boy." The story of the rescue on Lake Mead quickly spread through the police department and the local community. People called it a real-life miracle. But for Evans, Sarah, and the Navy SEALs family, it was more than just a miracle. It was a most profound testament to the extraordinary loyalty and protective instinct of dogs. Sometimes, the true heroes don't wear capes, nor do they need to speak. They just need to be there, listening to the unspoken and acting when the rest of the world seems to have turned away. And on the surface of the lake that day, Rex's bark was the sound of life, shattering the silence of waiting death.